So I want to welcome everybody here. Julie Rudder and I'm Lynette Rail. We're going to be doing the workshop this afternoon. And it's going to be about how to sort of figure out how to use the blocks in Hyrax in order to create a repository. And we're going to sort of start out though, I wanted to get a feel for where everybody is right now and sort of their use of Hyrax. So I'm going to start by saying, hey, those who have used, like, going way back, Sophia or curation concerns, okay? Any version of Hyrax at all? Okay, that's good. And how about Hyrax 2 and then 2.1, the latest one with the collection types? Well, that's really good. So we actually have some pretty good knowledge in the room already. So the very first part that we're going to go through are building blocks, and those are going to look at the various types, and those might actually go faster since there's a little more knowledge in the room. So since not everyone raised their hand, I really want to emphasize that if you have questions as we go, definitely go ahead and shoot up your hand now. There's a mic for asking questions, but I think if they're short questions, I'll just repeat them back after you ask them, and that'll probably be easier than passing the mic around. So the break for the afternoon is at 3 o'clock, so it doesn't actually fit with the way we originally planned it. So depending on where the building blocks end up in actual time, because this is our planned time, things don't always go that way. If they run long, we'll take the break right after building blocks. If they run on the shorter side, we'll do one of the use cases first, and then we'll have a break. So we're doing 3 full use cases and a description of a 4th one first. And then we're going to have you guys work together on, hopefully, you brought some use cases, but if not, we have a few that we can give you to work on. And you can select from the ones that are of interest to you. Did anybody bring use cases? Oh, good. Well, that's a few. Excellent. So we'll break into groups for the hands-on activity, and you can work together through a worksheet that asks some questions that you want to look at as you're going to decide how to build a repository. And then the last part, and that's where we'll have some wiggle room depending on how long we run in the others, we'll do some group discussions to sort of talk about where your group ended up in their particular design. So, any questions as we get started? It's easy, no questions yet, because nothing's really happened yet. Okay, so we're going to jump right into the building blocks. And these are the building blocks that we're going to talk about. So there are other parts to Hyrax that we could spend some time on, but these are the sort of major high-level blocks that we use to construct the repository. So for anyone who has not used Hyrax 2.1 yet, collection types are new to that. So prior to that, the only kind of collection we had is a user collection. And now you can actually create different types of collections with different kinds of characteristics. And you can kind of customize it based on the needs of your particular repository. So some of those things that you can customize is you can determine whether or not you want your collections to be nestable, so that collections can go inside collections. Do you want people to work collaboratively on their collections, and where you can actually share permissions between the collections? Optionally, those permissions that you define can also go down to the works themselves. Now, in previous versions, admin sets let you define what are called permission templates, and those permission templates are applied down to works when you create them new. I'm going to talk about that a little more later, but that same behavior can now be done with collections. Yes?
With collections, being able to use something being able to belong in multiple collections, how does that work? Permission template work?
Yes, so the way that works is that, oh, I should repeat your question. I'm gonna have to get used to that. So the question was, since works can belong to multiple collections, how does it determine what permissions it's actually going to apply to the work? And there's actually a pretty good description of that in the documentation. If you go out to samvera.github.io, it will talk about how those permissions are applied when they're defined admin sets and they're defined in collections. So I'm going to give you the quick answer, but if you don't completely get that, I highly recommend going to read the documentation because it's got examples and is pretty good detail there. So what it does is those permissions are only applied when you create the work. So if you create the work in a collection, it will apply the permission, the admin set permissions and the collection permissions as additive. If you try to create that work in multiple collections, then it will only apply the admin set because there's no way for us to know which collection you actually wanted that to be from. And we could have, when we were creating them, done a little bit different design, but we didn't. So I'm not going to go into what the other options could have been because they don't actually exist. This is the way we went. And if at a later time we decide we want that to be different as a community, we can adjust that somewhat. If you just added in an admin set, then it's just going to apply the admin set. Okay, and so another new piece with 2.1 is the branding, where you can do some very basic branding. You can put a little header on the collection, and you can also put some logos that go in there. And I'll show a little bit more about that later. And you can have some control over discovery. And the main thing you can do is you can say, these collections of this particular type can be discovered, or they cannot. And if they are, the controls that you see for the collection will look really similar to what you have already, where you can set it to public, private, or institutional. And then the last part is multi-membership control. So you can say that this works that go into this collection of this type, they can only be in one and only one of this type. Or you can say they can be in any of this particular type. And that's really just to give you some control. So you might ask the question, why are these all these configuration stuff? And part of that is when the working group was working on deciding what to do with these, we couldn't agree. In the multiple institutions that were participating in that process, we could not agree on what these features were and what they should, how they should act for any given institution. So the best approach for that is to make them configurable. So the last part that you can configure is a certain set of roles that apply at the collection type level. And that is a manager and a creator. And in this case, the manager can affect all things about collections of that type, and the creator can create collections of that type. So you can have a user collection that any user can create, and then you can have exhibits or something that's specific to the library that only a particular set of users can create. So we're going to look real quick at a couple of configurations just so you can see how that is. There's whole much more different types that could be used, but these are the ones that we're highlighting today. So user collections already existed previously, and this is really designed for users to organize their own work. It's not for any kind of organizational process. And so they can do things, I should say that, I'm going to say they can nest, they can share, they can allow multiple membership, they can brand, and they can make them discoverable. Of that set of things they can do, there are two things in there that they couldn't do before 2.1, and that's nesting and branding. And there was some discussion about whether or not user collections should be exactly like they were before, or can we let them do this new behavior, and new behavior won out. But we don't allow them to have those permissions apply down to works. So when a user creates a work in one of their collections, that does not apply down to any works that are created in there. So the role of manager is by site managers, and the role of creators, any user. Any user can create a user collection. And this is just showing the configuration screen. So all those match up to what I was just talking about. And this is the screen for actually entering users, the roles, the manager and the creator role. And you can set it to an individual group or to a user. And exhibits. So for exhibits, this would be more of a library staff situation where you are selecting out particular works and you want to have them under a common theme, and you're going to want to probably have just your staff do this. So this isn't going to be any user. So you can now configure that a little bit differently than your user collections, and that's the benefit of the configurations. So in this case, we definitely want our exhibits to be brandable because that's a key piece of exhibits, and we definitely want them to be discoverable because that's what you do with exhibits. You want the public to find them, and we want to be able to have teams creating these exhibits. We don't want it to be just one user so they can share, and multiple memberships. Sure, a work can be in any number of exhibits. And I will point out that in your case, you may think it's fine to have nested exhibits. And in our particular use case, we're not letting exhibits nest. So this is totally up to your particular site. And so you're applying the settings to new works added directly in the exhibit instead of the user collection. And you may not want to do that. And in the later user case, when I go into more detail about this, you'll see why you may not want to do that. And in this case, our managers are our site admins and our exhibit coordinators. And the creators would be the exhibit managers. So whoever's going to do any particular exhibit, they can create a new exhibit, and then they have permissions for that exhibit. And again, here's, I will point out one thing that I didn't before. So in the last time we saw these configurations, the screen was all grayed out. That's because once you have collections of a particular type, you cannot modify these. So you really want to think about your collection types fairly detailed in advance because you don't want users out there creating collections and then go, we don't want this to have multiple membership or we don't want to have discovery because you can't turn it off. You can get around that in Rails console, but you really don't want to because once you've created some of these things, like if you let users nest and then you try to turn it off, what do you do with the collections they've already nested? So there's all sorts of issues with that. And again, the manager screen looks really similar. We just have a few more groups that are in here for filling those roles. Judy.
Okay, so admin sets really provide the repository administrators the ability to apply workflows used for new works, control the visibility options for available works and that are available for works, and set the initial edit read permission to designated users or groups. So for admin sets, they are the only place where you can apply a visibility template, so you can prevent users from choosing certain options or force them to use certain options, or it's the only place that you can provide a workflow. So anytime you don't want to use the default workflow we're going to explain a little bit better, but as soon as it goes in, it's published. Anytime you want to deviate from that, you have to use an admin set. Does that make sense? Okay. So every repo has to have an admin set, at least one admin set. It doesn't have to have more than one. And every work has to be in an admin set. So if you think about it, if you have more than one admin set and you have different permissions between those, it's really important that the work actually gets deposited in the right admin sets. Because if that's flowing the permissions to a new work that's added and that work is entering a workflow, then it has to go to the right admin set. Is that clear? Okay. So it can set the visibility options, which I said, and you will inherit permissions and roles like on collection types. You cannot brand, you cannot nest, it's not discoverable, and there's no multi-membership for admin sets. Okay, so here's, yes.
Quick question. Forgive me for those who have gone on to 2.1. I'm on like 2.0.
Okay.
I'm trying to understand how this model has changed. It seems like an admin set is now a type of collection.
It is. That's right.
Can you clarify before it wasn't? Or?
So before, actually, Lynette's the best person to answer this, but let me give her the mic. Hey, that's a good idea.
Yes, so the interesting thing is that the admin sets are actually the same set of code underneath that they were previously. But through the UI, we surface them like they're a collection. And part of the reason for doing that is long term, we want collections and admin sets to merge and be the same set of code underneath. But it was too much to take on our first tackling of the collection extensions. So even though in the UI, when you're going through, you'll say add collection, and one of the collection types will be admin set. When you go to the admin set screen where you edit and modify it and do all that stuff, same screen we had before. So under the covers, it is separate from collections. But mentally, it's like we're trying to treat them like they're collections. So you'll see some things that are the same in the UI for all of them. They follow the same UI patterns, but underneath the covers, they're actually different. Does that answer your question?
So
because I'm seeing some, this can be a confusing part, I agree.
So when you go into Hyrax 2.0, if you did a fresh Hyrax install, and you had collection types, admin set would be a type of collection that's in 2.1. It's different underneath the hood, but it's presented in the UI the same, except there are some different settings. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, and I will say that these settings that you're looking at are only capturing the way admin sets already worked. And you cannot edit these. You cannot change these because...
That's why these are light gray. These the ones before were like blue check marks.
Yep.
These are light gray. You can't do anything about this.
And these last three are only available for admin sets. You cannot ever select them for a collection. So if you go to create a collection type, that's those will already be grayed out all the time.
And so the purpose of what we're doing today is trying to help you think through when to use collections and when to use admin sets. And we do it differently. I kind of tend to do admin sets, and Lynette tends to use different types of collections.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to help you tease out.
But when we do the use cases, we'll talk a little more about that particular part.
I just wanted to show you the participants' screens, basically the same as what you're seeing before. Okay, so workflow strategy. So the workflow dictates what can happen before work is available. 2 workflows, and they can only be applied on admin sets, which we said. 2 workflows come out of the box. The default workflow, that's the auto-publish that I mentioned, and the one-step mediated workflow, where the manager on the set is enabled to, the person in the manager role is enabled to review and approve, and must review and approve a work before it's published. So those 2 come out of the box. The other option is that you can create some custom workflows. So some people might, for an example, want to have like a tombstone feature where they don't want people to actually delete anything. So that's something that we customize. We wanted the deletion to be a request for deletion instead of a real deletion. So we do that custom through workflows. Okay. Oh, that's just the screen that gives you basically the same text that I just said. Okay, so visibility. There are, I'm going to go to this page. So these are the visibility options that are on admin sets and only admin sets. So what this does is completely limits what the depositor to that admin set can choose. So it really is, if you have this selected, they cannot choose anything else except public. That makes sense? If you have institution, they have to choose institution. The top one, this is parts, a lot of people find this really confusing, so just stop me if it seems a little confusing. The top allows you to restrict whether or not they can have embargoes and what the length of embargo is, and whether or not they can have releases. Any questions? Go ahead.
If you wanted to set the visibility so that it could, it's all settings allowed. There we go.
Yeah, this is the, I think this, and then I think this is the default.
Default, yeah.
Yeah, and so basically if you don't want to be restricted, you want to choose that.
now that we've sort of done some of the configuration piece of it, we're going to step down to the building block that is collections. And that's the first thing that you can do that the end users are going to be able to see. So everything else we've been looking at, those are for admins. Admins set up those configurations. And now we're at a place where users can do something. So collections are basically just a way for people to collect works together. And we've created some different collection types that can control how they can do that. But that's what the main purpose of collections are. So now that we have collection types, when you go to create a new collection, instead of just creating that default user collection, you're going to be given a list of potential collections you can create. Now, if you've set it up so that your user can only create user collections, you wanted to maintain the same behavior as before, they wouldn't see this screen. If the only thing they can create is one type of collection, it'll just jump right into that type of collection. There's no reason to show a user a selection box with only one choice. So there's a couple of additional configurations that can be done for a collection. You can, and this again is done, the customized metadata is done before the user ever sees the collection. That's done in code. So you can actually edit the collection model, and you can list out what properties are going to be seen in that collection. So some of the characteristics of that is that unlike work types where you can define a different set of metadata for each work type, the metadata is shared by all the collections. There is a sort of way to get around that by doing some checking of what type it is in your form class or your presentation class. So the form class for editing and the presentation class for display on your show page. And you can do a check and see, actually, I know this isn't mostly code here. I am a developer, and so I could not resist. Oh, no, I didn't do it here.
It's the next one.
It's the next one after that? Okay. I put a little code in there just to show that you can actually check the type, and you can see, oh, it's, in mine, I have agencies and divisions are my collection types, so I can check if it's the agency, I want all this metadata. Otherwise, I just want a little bit of metadata. And so I can do something similar to that in the form class, and that just lets me determine which metadata actually gets displayed. Yes?
So it sounds like in this case you're choosing to show or hide work level metadata. Is that, am I misunderstanding?
Yes, so the question was, am I choosing to show and hide work level metadata? No, I'm choosing to show and hide collection level metadata. So work types already control what metadata you see based on the different types, but not for collection types. It's the same metadata for all collection types. So I'm sneaking around it.
So, all right, so if you wanted a collection type with like other metadata fields, in addition, you have to do that in code, right?
Yes, so the question was, do I have to do this? Do I have to do this in code in order to get different metadata types? And that's yes. And basically, in your model, you define the superset. You define all the metadata you could possibly have in any collection type, and then you limit it here.
It comes with a set of metadata fields that are probably you're not going to use.
Yes,
they're basically
most
the
don't
same as
use the
generic
default
code.
set. You can.
So you're suggesting having one collection type, and you just give it kind of all possible metadata fields rather than like having multiple collection types.
So the question was, do I have one collection type? And the answer is no, you don't have one collection type. You can have many collection types, but one model. So there's one collection model. And actually, I think if I step back, no, I don't show it there either. This is just an example of my custom metadata for one of my apps. So the default metadata out of the box, you have title and abstract summary on the main screen, and then there's a whole ton of stuff you may or may not want in the additional fields. Yes?
When you're saying you have one model, do you mean one work type?
So I really need to make a distinction here that we're talking about collection types and not work types. So we're going to talk about work types in a minute, but work types defines how you construct works. Collection types talks about how you construct collections. So there is a collection model that defines what metadata will show up on this screen that's defining a collection. So when I say new collection, I get a list of fields. I define that in my collection model.
So the description is for the collection, not for each work in the collection.
That's
or
right.
The title is for the collection.
Yeah, this is all metadata about the collection. None of this will be applied to a work.
Back to the code question. I'm familiar with the workaround you did with the presenter and the form. Can I use a very similar workaround for singular versus multiple that we do with work types?
You can, yeah, the same. So the question was, there's code stuff examples out there for being able to turn a multi-value field into a single value field, and that same process can be applied for collection metadata. Any other questions? These are excellent questions. Any others? All right, did I hit everything?
Back here.
Oh, yes, question.
I'm quite new to the duration consents side of the Hyrax. So all I know is the work type is actually stored in the Fedora model. Where is this stored, the collection type? Is it stored in Postgres data if you would map to it, or where does it get stored?
So let me repeat your question, make sure I'm going to answer the right one. The question is, where is the collection type information stored? So do you mean like the settings and everything, or do you mean like how does what the collection type is get stored with the collection itself?
Yeah, in terms of your database form, where does it get stored? Whether it's in Fedora or...
So I'll answer both those questions because I think that'll answer your question. You let me know if I don't get it. So one question is to ask, all those settings we looked at earlier, where do those get stored? When you create a collection type and you set all those settings, they get stored in the database. When you actually create a new collection, it gets a collection type ID, and that is stored in Fedora with the collection. All right, so one of the other things you can customize is branding, and you can do the headers and the logos. So this is what the page looks like when you can do branding. One thing I might point out to you is up at the top where it says description and branding. You notice it just says description and branding. There's no sharing, there's no discovery. This particular collection type, whatever it is, the only things it says it can do is branding. So if you can't do something, it's not going to show up in that set of tabs. So here, we've added a banner, and after you save it, the image will show up. And then you can add any number of logos to go in there as well. Now, I didn't actually capture a screen of a collection that's using these, but these logos actually get printed out over top of the banner. So you'll want to just make sure that when you're designing your exhibits or anything that uses branding, that the images are compatible with each other so that they look decent. Okay. And then the last thing that you can customize about collections, well, there's actually one more on another slide. But the last thing here is the visibility. And if you can set something to discovery, to be discoverable, you'll get this discovery tab. And you can set the same things you've been able to set previously, so public, institution, private. There's no embargoes or leases on collections, just your 3 basic types.
And when it's discoverable, that's just like in the search results, it would show up like another entry in search results.
Yeah, the question was, what does it really mean to be discoverable? Is this something that shows up in search results? And that is what it means. And if you're logged into the system and you do a search, even though something's private, it may show up, right? Because you, as a logged-in user, can see it. So this is really to think about what is it like for the external users. When they search, it's not going to be discoverable. And you can see here that even if you say a collection type is discoverable, users can still set it to private, and then it's not discoverable. So then we have sharing, where you can actually identify which groups can work together. Okay, I did. So this is very similar to the screen we saw for collection types, except that we have 3 different roles. We have a manager, depositors, and viewers. And if you've been working with admin sets, that looks really similar to what you define when you set up a new admin set. You can say there's managers, depositors, and viewers. If you said these permissions apply down to the work, then anyone who's set up as a manager, they can manage this collection's metadata and things that are in this collection, and they become editors of any works that get created in that collection. If you set someone up as a depositor, then they can add things to the collection. They can put new works in there. If you set someone up as a viewer, then they can see this collection even if it's private. And they can see the list of items in there, although they still will be limited on which items they can see. If the items are private to that user, then they won't be able to see them. So they'll see this collection because they're a viewer of this collection. If you create a new work in this collection and you've said permissions will be applied to works, then viewers will become readers of those works. Any questions there? Okay, so I did talk about roles. Yeah, I put the roles and the sharing all lumped into one screen because they really go together, hand in hand. Oh, and so I wanted to take this opportunity because every time I talk about applying permissions, it always comes up, should I apply the permission to a group of users or to an individual user? Because of the way the system is put together and the fact that it copies it down at creation time, what happens is all that information is applied to the work, but if you go later change the admin set or the collection and change who can be a manager or who can be a viewer, and if it's at the individual level, that is not going to trickle down to those works that are already created. Because once they get created and once those permissions are applied at create time, there's sort of a disconnect. And there's no change to the admin set or collection that will be applied down to that work. So the impact is that if a user leaves a project, then you have to go and edit every individual work and take that user off from having permission. If you put them in a group, then all you have to do is take them out of the group. Now, if you want to change groups, you have the same problem. Like if you want to apply a different group up at the admin set or collection itself, then you're going to have a similar problem where you would have to go edit every work. But that's way less common. So yes, groups are a good thing. So it really behooves you to take some time, think about your groups, set them up, and apply group permissions instead of individual users.
Can you explain that groups don't come out of the box with Hyrax?
Good, excellent. So Julie just asked me to explain that groups don't come out of the box from Hyrax. Groups don't come out of the box from Hyrax. So does the reason why, I will give a little bit of that. The reason why they don't come out of the box from Hyrax is that different institutions have different approaches to groups. Some use LDAP, some use Shibboleth, some use like Groupify to set up their groups. So because there's different ways they do it, we can't really just incorporate that in. So that is not in there by default. So you have to set it up yourself.
So you use Rollmat or whatever?
We use Groupify.
Okay. We use Rollmat, whatever that
Yeah.
is. I wanted to make one more point about this since we've talked about visibility. There's a similar concept when if you change the visibility on an admin set and you all of a sudden want to allow people to, you were allowing people to do all kinds of settings when they submit new works. So that's just like a default setting when somebody submits a new work. Say you change it and you're like, you really want these to all be public. That's not going to affect the works that have already been created. It just applies to new works that are going to go into the admin set.
So I think there's one place in Hyrax that prompts you, do you want to apply this to everything under it? I think when you
It's
change
files.
a work,
It works to file
it
sets.
asks if you want to apply those settings down to file sets.
File sets.
So I really hope that as Hyrax progresses, it will do something similar for collections and admin sets. So that if you make a change in the permissions, it asks you, do you want to apply those permissions down to the things that are in there? But it doesn't exist now.
Okay, work types. I'll use this. I think this is still on. Okay, so work types. So work types are really a classification tool that allow the submission of a work to the repository. So it could be, you could have one work type. Some repositories just have a generic work type, have 1 million fields on it, and everything goes through that. Other people create 10 to 12 plus work types. So it really depends on your use cases and the metadata that you want for each one. So something common might be an article versus a data set versus a video. How many people know about Hyrax? Okay, Hyrax is a default, is a community default Hyrax instance that the DCE hosts for us. And you can go to it, DC, what is it? It's Hyrax.curation. Thank you. You can log in and you can follow along all these screens on Hyrax. I think if that redirects to stable, then that will be an older release, but if it redirects to -dev, that is the master, basically. So it's going to be ahead of what you're seeing in 2.1. Okay. So this is, this screenshot, and all our screenshots come from Hyrax. So if there are more than one work type, the user will be prompted to decide what work type they should submit. This is really easy. No. Do you want to talk about this? Let me see your side. Yeah.
So this is actually throwing in just a little bit more code stuff. And this is right out of the README in Hyrax. When you want to create, when you're in the process of setting up your first Hyrax application, one of the things it's going to have you do is to generate a work type. And so if you want to, you just basically put the name of this is the name of the work type, and this is just identifying which generator is going to run. And you're saying I want to create a Hyrax work, so you just put in that for the name. And here I'm just showing two different works. You could create them for how many works that you want to do. And I did also point you to this tutorial, customizing metadata tutorial. By the way, these slides they are available. I had the bit.ly on the very first screen, and
it's also linked from that web page that I sent you, that Wikimedia page.
Yeah, so it's from the syllabus page as well. But anyway, I will say that this particular tutorial has not been updated with Hyrax 2.1, so it could possibly be a little outdated. I haven't run through it recently. But it does give you sort of the overview of what kinds of things you need to change, like changing the form class and changing the presenter in order to control what kinds of things people see for each one. So I'm not going to go into detail because we could do a whole workshop on just customizing metadata for works. But I did want to give that link so people could see that.
Okay, I already went over this. Oh, there's another type of work type. So not a content work type, but maybe just, just a real mechanism of administration. So one department in a master's program has to have this set of fields. It's not really an image or an article specific. It's just specific to this very one administrative use. So works are different than work types. Work type is that mechanism that makes something, has a unique set of fields and it facilitates the ingest. Works are the basic content item in the repository, and works bring together files or file sets and the associated metadata and presents them as one intellectual object. So this is a work. It has 2 file sets and 1 child work. The reason you can tell that it's a child work is because you don't have this option right here. So metadata, does this have a look here? Metadata, relationships, what collections it in, file sets, and then any other child works that it contains.
I have a question. It's more related to work types than to works, so I'm hoping we can clarify this a bit. You were saying that some people choose to have, say, 12 work types. Are there any standards that define what should be a work type, for example? And what I mean by that is I've seen the examples of moving image, still image, perhaps a paper or something else. Now, the metadata to describe a map image is very different from an art object. Would I have a different work type for the two images? Or would I create one for still images that describes both?
Yeah, so I think the key, so the question was, is there any sort of standard approach to defining work types, best practices kind of thing? What I've seen is that sometimes they do them by type. So you are giving two different types of images that have really different metadata, and so they might choose to have two different types for those images. Or if they have, similar image metadata, they might have it. So in that case, we're looking at work types created by basically the type of thing you're committing. In other repositories, they don't worry about the type at all. They use the same work type for all of those various types, and they try to do a superset of fields. And in other cases, like the other example that Julie gave, is sometimes it's more administrative oriented. This department wants this metadata, this department at the university wants this metadata, so they have a different work type to allow those departments to have their own specific type of metadata. So I think the key there is it really depends on your repository, what your needs are.
And the users as well, because that one consideration is if you're doing a digital collections app where most of the users of your repository are library staff, they're trained staff, they're using it every day, they can learn the system, versus like an institutional repository where it's an occasional user and you cannot present them with 40 fields, or else they're out of there. So it just really depends on your use case.
Something we do at UC is we use a work type and a role. So like an ETD manager only can see
Yes.
the ETD work type.
That's a customization. So the example was, it was a customization that Cincinnati does, where there's a manager can only use certain types of works, can only submit certain types of works.
I was gonna say, in the repo manager kind of workshop we did this morning, we were talking about work types and getting together, kind of like bringing together especially common work types as like a possible future thing we might want to do. Yeah. But basically to like say like, okay, everyone who's working with maps, let's kind of get together. And that's a little bit like map, metadata application profile kind of synchronizing a little bit, like let's all use the same metadata, but also like let's see how we should break it down and maybe develop some kind of like guidelines. Now I wouldn't say like it's always customizable, and that's like a great thing that you can do it for what you want.
But a default option.
But a default
Did everybody
option.
hear that in the back? Okay. Just making sure.
Yeah, that was kind of the idea behind curation concerns many years ago, is that we were going to be able to write.
Pass this
Sorry.
down because we're getting longer responses here, so I wanted to.
So that was kind of the idea when we originally started with curation concerns, is that we as developers could then code a concern. And then if other institutions wanted to use that concern, it was available.
Just to piggyback on that, we were talking about part of that this group would be deciding if the best way to share work types between institutions is just in like Excel documents that have mappings, or if it's like actually creating an actual gem someone else could use, or what that would be. So that could be like future discussion around that.
Excellent.
Okay, so another thing about works, they can be metadata only, no files. They can contain one or more files, or they can be nested in many works. So you can, a parent can have many children. A child can have many parents. Is that right? Yes, that's right. Sorry?
We haven't gotten that to work.
Which
very
one?
well. A child having many parents.
That's
Well, we haven't gotten it to work kind of full circle, like.
There's only one way you can add a relationship.
Okay.
But, and you can't, a child cannot see its parent, but a parent can see its child. Does that make sense?
If only that were real.
I think I'm not really sure what the UI is, if you can see it when you edit, but not on the show screen, not even when you edit.
A child cannot see its parent.
I thought it should have been a relationship function.
I don't think so.
No,
Somebody
just
testify.
added that.
Yeah, you can test it for us and let us know.
I'm pretty sure we tried this. Maura, didn't you try this many times and you found this? I thought so. Okay, so The good thing is that, the great thing about child works versus nested works. So one of the thoughts through that we're going to ask you to think through is what are the relationships you need. So if you have relationships where you really want to make the relationship between works, but you have full description on both of those things you want to make a relationship, that's a good argument for parent-child. If you have a work that has one set of description and you have a bunch of files that they all kind of attach to that, then you don't necessarily need a file set. I'm sorry, you can use a file set, I'm sorry. So example might include an article with a data set. Full description on the article, full description on the data set. Journal issues with individual articles. Journal issue has a metadata record, it's a work. Each individual article is also a work. Okay. Book with chapters, another example. Not sure why I put that in there. I think it was, I don't remember. I think that was the child work that I showed you that was from that first page where you can see the parent. So this is a file set. So some of the considerations are, this is all the metadata you get for a file set. This is what you get for a work. Well, we can't see it all, but there's a lot. The other thing is, let's see. Let's say you had a DOI for everything in the repository. Well, there's no, unless you're customizing, a file set's not going to have a DOI. Make sense?
When was nesting works inside works as of?
I actually don't know. Has that been around for a while?
It was in 2.0.
It was in 2.0?
Okay.
I don't know if it's in 2.1, but it was in 2.0 for sure.
Is there something you have to do to enable that?
No,
Okay.
it's not a configuration.
Some of that might not have been in the UI and like you could do it, but I might not have been in the UI until like some more something.
I was pretty sure that you couldn't, I'm not sure it was in the UI for 1.0 series, but I was pretty sure that it was in there for 2.0. The major thing that changed in 2.1 was the collection extensions, and there were a few other things that kind of came along for the ride.
So here's the definition of the file set. It's the set that holds the original uploaded file and any generated derivative files. A couple other features of file sets. Well, first of all, it has to be attached to a work. You can't just create a file set. It has to be attached to a work. Well, I think you can force that, but not through the UI. I told you about the descriptive metadata limitations. The technical metadata is at this level. And then you can order, and you can change, you can put file-specific access controls. And the other feature that's only at this level are the single-use links. So if somebody wants to give a single-use link out, it happens at the file set level, not the work level.
So are you guys pretty comfortable with file sets? Because I know people, when they're new to Hyrax, sometimes have some confusion around file sets, but does anyone have questions around file sets? All right, good.
Okay, so that's all of our building blocks. And also, we just wanted to say that we made up the term building blocks with this workshop because we think it's really nice because they are building blocks that come up. So if you hear other people and they're like building blocks, we heard it here first, okay?
It's 8 minutes to the break, and I don't know if anything's out there already. We could sneak out early and you guys would get the good snacks, or we could do questions.
I got a question. So the collection types are great. Is that kind of list of them fairly set going forward? Do you anticipate more being added?
The collection types, the only two that come out of the box are user collections and admin sets, and that's to be backward compatible.
Sorry, I meant the options.
Oh, the
Like
settings?
accessible, discoverable.
And until there's more work done, those are the settings.
But
And
do you foresee more being added in the future?
the one that might be added, there was a lot of discussions in the working group about being able to define a workflow at the collection level and control some visibility at the collection level. It's just how to do that and combine it with the definitions of admin sets, and something has to be in an admin set, was a little too muddy. And so that got punted. And the hope was that when this design got in and it settled in and people became comfortable with it, the path forward might be a little more clear on how to sort of make those admin sets and collections really the same thing. So that admin sets is truly just another type of collection. So there's some complexities there.
So we would potentially have a use case to add one, and so I wasn't sure if, again, the community was anticipating some new ones coming in, or that list.
So are you saying you have a particular kind of setting you would like to add to
Possibly.
collection types? What would that be?
Adding a slug or the URL to be able to reference. I know this would take more coding to get in, but so you could use a slug, Word, whatever, to have in your access URL for the collection.
So the suggestion was that there be a slug ID type thing that you can add in. Would that be on a collection or a collection type? Because that sounds almost like that's more collection level metadata to me. Like each collection would have a slug versus each collection type having a slug.
Yeah, or the types, some might have them, some might not. So I was thinking that.
Oh, so so the suggestion then is that there be a configuration that this particular collection type wants to have slugs.
Right.
Yeah, and that would not be hard to add. That would actually be fairly simple extension.
Okay.
We would just have to, I would suggest that you put it in as an issue in Hyrax and sort of define out this is how you think it would work. And someone might pick up that work because that's not a particularly challenging extension, and I don't think it would create a conflict with anything else that's already in there. Yes?
I often see that when the application is redeployed on a new machine, or if the application is updated or upgraded, there's always a disconnect between the admin set and the workflow roles, and you have to redo connections back to the application. So why does it happen in the system?
So you're saying that when you update the application, you're seeing a disconnect between workflow roles and that already were defined ahead of time as part of an admin set process or a workflow process?
Yeah, I'll have to redefine it.
Do you have custom workflows?
Sorry?
Do you have custom workflows? Or is it just default workflows?
I am trying to construct more workflows, and hence have a scenario-based question. But then I've also seen this behavior pattern with the default works and the workflow as well. And it's just like even with the new admin workflows always.
Yeah, so I would say that if you're seeing that for the mediated deposit workflow that comes with Hyrax, I would suggest that you enter an issue in Hyrax because that to me sounds like a bug. I would not expect that behavior to happen. Any other questions? Well, it's 3 minutes to the break, and I think that's close enough that we will call this break time. And why don't you plan to be back at 10 after? And then we'll start up on the use cases. All right, my computer says it's 10 after. So we're gonna move on to use cases in the next part here. And gonna repeat the slide that showed the building blocks because I thought it would be good to see. We did some color coding on the building blocks, and so when we get down towards the end, you'll see that color coding is carried through all of these examples. So the first use case we're gonna do is really the simplest use case. It's where Sophia started. And Sophia really is the base of all this software we've been talking about today. So it is the underpinnings of curation concerns. It's the underpinnings of Hyrax. And that started with ScholarSphere at Penn State. They are sort of the original developers of this particular code base that we're working with. And their use case was self-deposit. So self-deposit is basically, I have researchers at my university, they are producing research data and we want to capture it. And we want them to put it in themselves. So that's how it is that it's a self-deposit system. So pretty much anybody who has a login can deposit to our system. Now they control their logins by having it in an LDAP. So that doesn't mean anybody in the world can create a login and start depositing things to their system. So it is somewhat closed. But it's way more open than some of the systems that library staff might work with. So Just to point out, up at the top, you see it says describe the high-level use case. These are coming right off the worksheet that you guys are going to use in the hands-on portion. So the second thing you're going to talk about is what kind of users are using your system. And for self-deposit, we basically just have two kinds of users. We have the admins who administer the system, and then we have all the other users, all these self-depositors. So basically, as a logged-in user, I can create a new work. I want it to be attributed to me, and I want to be able to make it discoverable to the public. And I also want to be able to organize my works, and I want to share my works with other people. Maybe I'm sharing them because we collaborated in the process of creating these works, or I just have like a particular list of works that I want other people to be able to take a look at. So what, this is just more about the users. What kinds of groups do I need for these users? Admins and registered users are predefined in the system. So for this particular use case, I don't really need to do anything because admins are in the admin group and all users who have logins are in the registered group. So I really don't have to do anything. But I do need to sort of recognize that those are the kind of groups of users I'm going to be working with. What kind of data is going in? I've got articles, presentations, data sets, posters, images, video. But because this is a self-deposit system, I have decided not to do a whole bunch of work types. I'm just going to let it be one work type with a bunch of metadata, standard set, and they're going to put it in there. You might want to choose to do that differently. Part of the reason why you might choose that for a self-deposit is these things that you're depositing might be files that are all going into the same work. So I have a work that is a presentation that I gave at a conference, and I wrote an article, and I created a poster, and I had a data set that went with it. And so I'm not really creating my work based on a type because I'm doing it as a research unit. And that can be widely variable from individual user to user. Now the complexity there is what we talked about earlier, where if you've got one big long set of metadata, it's a lot harder to get people to fill in those fields when they are occasional depositors as opposed to super users who are staff. So that's the challenge side if you decide to go that route. With the workflow here, I'm really just going to use the default workflow. There's no mediation here because it's my work. I'm putting it in, and I'm saying it's good, and it's done. So when I get done, I just say save, and it automatically has whatever visibility I set. So I could have made it private, I could have made it public, but I'm the one who chooses it right when I create the work. So in my particular system, this is describe your visibility and embargo policies. And I'm saying I'm not doing anything special here. I really don't want my users to be able to do embargoes and leases, but I'm okay with them being able to set it to public and private. Because by definition of my system, one of the things that I said about my system is that the users need to be able to make their works public. So they can control that visibility themselves, but I have decided that I'm not going to let them do embargoes and leases. Somebody else might make a different decision about their self-deposit system. So I did just want to point out, in order to make something where it can't have embargoes and leases, but it can set the regular visibility, this is what those settings would look like. So it's this top one that makes it so it's not embargoes and leases. That's what makes it so those options don't show up when they try to create a work. And this one is the one that lets them have all the choices of public, private, and institution. So then we come to discovery. What kinds of discovery needs do exist for this particular system? Well, we said it's a self-deposit system, and we want the world to be able to find my works, because I think my works are really important. So I definitely want the world to find the works. So yeah, we need users to be able to set the discovery options. And that basically is the public, private, and institutional settings. So we want that tab to show up for them, that they can set those. And so I just put two other things on there, and these last two items are both customizations. the second one, the schema.org sort of comes out of the box. There's a little bit of schema.org stuff. So the first one is Google Scholar meta tags, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that comes out of the box at all. I think that's a customization you would have to add.
It comes out of the box, but there are certain fields that Scholar wants that do not come on the generic workflow. So like for example, I think journal title or journal issue or something is something that Google's like, we really need this for optimization, but it's not on the generic work type.
Yes, so schema.org is also something that there's a little bit of it out of the box, but it may not come out exactly how you want. So the schema.org type out of Hyrax out of the box comes out to be the work type. And that may not be appropriate for what you really want that schema.org type to be. So if you want to control that a little more, you actually have to do a customization. So the next thing you'll want to consider is how you want works grouped together. In this particular case, from an admin set perspective, remember we have to have all of our works in an admin set, but I don't really have any special workflow or visibility needs there. It's the same through the whole system. So I say it's the default workflow for every work. It's the same visibility settings for every work. So I can just pick the default admin set. I set it up to be those particular settings that I want it to be, and then all my works will just go into that default admin set. So the thing that I do want to do is allow users to organize their works. So they want to be able to set up user collections to organize their works, maybe while they're putting them together, maybe to be able to share them with other people. So the characteristics, we pretty much just let them do everything like it comes out of the box, except I don't want them to be able to be the collections themselves to be discoverable. Now that's how I did it. Somebody else might say, oh no, it's fine. The users are depositing their work. They may want to say, these are all my works that are on this particular topic. So I can see a case where you might want to let it be, their collections be discoverable. And the same thing with branding. You know, part of the reason you might decide not to let them do branding is you don't want just a whole bunch of extra files uploaded to the system that they're not really being, they're not really preservation type documents. And so we don't want to clutter up our system with these extra image files. But if you're a completely open system, you may say, oh, no, that's fine. They can have these extra images, that's fine. So the one thing I want to point out, though, is that the default doesn't allow this. And if you remember, when we were looking at that particular settings tab, those aren't editable. So you can't change them. That's how they come out of the box in order to maintain backward compatibility. If you are, whether you're updating or creating a brand new Hyrax app, some of these can be turned off and it's not going to cause a problem with your system, but the only way to do that is through like the Rails console. So you go into the Rails console, you would pull up this particular collection type in the Rails console, and then you can turn those settings off and save them. But again, like I pointed out earlier, if it's something where collections have already been created, there's a couple of them that would cause you problems if you turn it off. So nesting is one, because if people already have nested collections, what are they going to do with them once they've already created them? So if you try to turn it off, you're going to have some inconsistency in the way your system is. The other is multiple membership, because if you allow them to do it in multiple collections and then you turn it off, they already have some works that are in multiple collections, and so that just creates some inconsistency in your repository. So I need to put a really strong cautionary. It's not recommended that you go out there and change this, but if your system is just starting up and you're just designing it and there aren't any collections out there yet, then changing that is fine. It's not going to hurt anything. So do with a grain of salt. Okay, so the last thing we talk about in the worksheet is to describe your needs around relationships. There's a whole bunch of relationships between things in the repository. You can have collections in collections, you can have works in collections, you can have works in admin sets, you can have works in works, and you can have file sets in works. So At this point, we've actually looked at a lot of these already in the previous questions, so by the time you get to the last question, it's often really quite easy to answer those questions. So collections and collections, we're okay with that. We said we're okay with nesting, so that's fine. Collections, putting works in collections, well, if they want to, they can, but it's not required. They can do that. And we're going to just use the default admin set. So we don't have multiple things there, but every work has to be in an admin set, so we're just going to use the default. And works and works, we decided no, that we're not going to do that, but you could make a different decision. And file sets and works, well, that's a definite, because that's the main point of this particular use case. The self-deposit, they're depositing files and describing those files, and that's the main point of the use case. So before we move on, any questions about this one? Ah, that's where it ended up. There's our blocks. I must have put it in the wrong place. Oh, that's my machine, that's why.
I guess I have a question.
Oh, there are a couple other things on mine. Sorry, yes. So then I just went through and grouped them based on the blocks. So we have user collections for collection types. I also probably should have put admin sets in there, but we have this admin set strategy piece that's sort of treating the admin set slightly differently with the default admin set, do not show admin set selection. Oh, yes. If you have one and only one admin set, and you're using the default, one of the most common customizations, and I don't think this happens automatically in Hyrax, I think you have to choose it, on the work edit form, we take out the selection of that default admin set, because there's only one. So there's no reason to have them try and select that. That would just confuse users, so we don't do that. And all the works automatically go into that. And so we're using the default workflow, and for visibility strategy, we said users can set the public, private, and institutional, and collections are always private. We said they can't make the collections. Then for the work type strategy, we're doing a single work type, no nesting of work types, and for the work strategy, we're doing the sorry, I'm reading it myself. User self-deposit works and sets visibility of their own work. Okay, and then it's summarized. So you can see how all the blocks fit together. You can see our user collection and our admin set. I just repeated what the settings are and then what our strategies are. And then you can see how they sort of all flow together. Yes?
What's the situation where you would want to have more than one admin set?
Yes, so we're going to do a couple more use cases, and in that case, you will see admin sets.
Okay, we're going to get more complex as we go through the use cases, and then we're going to, in the last exercise, we're going to throw all those use cases together in one system and see what kind of problems come up, okay? So I'm going to go through mediated deposit. So the high-level use case is where a repository, this is just an example. This is a really simple mediated deposit example. Nobody has something this simple. But just for the sake of understanding how this works, just pretend that we have a master's papers from 2 different departments. They need to be reviewed and approved by different designated people in the departments before they become public, okay? So I'm gonna describe the types of content. Our master's papers that are created as a requirement of graduation. Some of the papers might have supplementary files like data sets. And departments have unique metadata fields that they really need differently from the other ones. They don't want to see any other metadata fields. So maybe they have like a concentration or a track or something like that. So the types of users, we have depositors who are occasional one-time submitters. They do it one time. You want them to have a good experience. You want to make it as simple as possible. You have reviewing staff who don't use the system except maybe once or twice a year during reviews period. It's also got to be pretty easy for them. There are staff that they're outside the library, so you're supporting an outside user. Then you have library staff who supports all these people. So any needs around relationship, the main need is between the files and the metadata. So the workflow needs are student submits a work, It has to be reviewed by student in Department A, submits works that need to be approved by Department A. Students in Department B need to submit works that are approved by staff in Department B. Staff in A should not be able to see works by staff from B, and vice versa. In addition, Department A only wants students to submit public works with an option of 2-year embargo policy. And Department B wants students to submit public works with an option of embargo for 6 months. So if you have more like a digital collections use case, you can imagine that you're supporting 2 different archives with different policies and different staff who should not be seeing each other's works. So the content's mostly described in Google Scholar, and all works, they just want to link to all the works by their master students to plot on their department website. That's all they want. I already said that. Okay. So I'm going to use admin sets. I'm going to use 2 admin sets because I have 2 different needs. And I'm going to use a work type facet that allows us to have that link. So work type A is Department of Chemistry, is Department A's master's paper. Work type 2 is Department of Anthropology. Thank you for the help, I'm tired. Department of Anthropology work type. So in Hyrax, we have blacklight facets by work type. Anytime a new work type is added, the link is good, right? It's just a search. Admin set strategy, 1 per department. The people in the manager role will serve as approvers for each submission. Okay, we don't even have to mess with workflow roles because in this situation, the manager of the set, it's okay for them to edit anything in the set. Okay, so 1-step workflow will be applied to each admin set. I showed you that, sorry. So for admin set A, this will be their setting, and admin set B would be 6 months right here. We're going to develop 2 new work types, I already talked about that. And we're going to need a customization because I'm going to show you something very scary. Don't be alarmed, this is Hyrax. It's no one's production system. Okay. In Hyrax, there are like 45 admin sets. And I just want to remind you that the admin set conveys the permission, the workflow. So that depositor has to choose the right one, or it's going to choose the top thing in the admin set list. No user is ever going to click on the relationship tab because we know there's 3 tabs, no one's ever going to click on that. And then Department A is going to get every single paper.
Right.
Okay? So you're going to have to write custom code to say Department A goes into admin set A. Department A work type goes into admin set A work type. Sorry, I got a visual. Department A work type, remember that, goes into admin set A, with the specific role, and the user never sees that tab. Okay? So 1-to-1 relationship between the admin set and the work type. Okay. Same with Department B. Is that pretty clear? Okay.
Yeah.
Scary enough?
But what I'm hearing is it's possible to tie a defaulted just of work type B into an admin set B.
Customization.
Yeah, it's a customization.
That's okay, that's
Yeah.
possible.
We're actually, our school's having, my institution, has a poster where we created
Oh, great.
a special, we have, I think 13 admin sets, no, 10 admin sets and 13 work types.
Okay.
So we'll have like 5 work types going into one admin set
Okay.
that has a default workflow, and then everything else has a 1-to-1. So come to my poster.
Yeah, I would just comment to you that that is not best practices to have that many admin sets. So like when you define collection types and you set up your admin sets, usually it's a handful. You know, like collection types might be 3 or 4 collection types you support. And admin sets, you know, you might have 5 or 6, but you're not going to have 20 or 30. I mean, it would be, I guess you could, but you might think about it.
You have 20?
Per department?
What?
If you did it per department and you had that many
Right, I suppose you could in certain use cases. So the second use case there was departments. What is your use case?
We have a really convoluted ETD application that has 15 different approval processes. So we have 5 schools, one of which has 15 departments, and each of those has a different group of people. So it's based on the workflow. It's not.
Yeah, we
it's
did
not
a
ideal.
similar thing.
But
Yeah.
it'd be interesting to hear if there are better ways to do that, but that's.
Yeah.
We did the workflow as well, where we added another custom feature because we have to support honors. There's 200 departments at our school, and so we basically made an affiliation field that maps to a reviewer. So we have to add the reviewer, but they all go into an admin set, so it's a little easier. But the workflow's a nightmare.
So I suppose when you guys get working, because we get sidetracked if we talk about it now,
Yeah.
when you guys get working on your group activities, if you want to work on that particular issue, we can come around and sort of brainstorm some ideas on how to approach that. I think in order to do it effectively, you're going to end up doing some customization.
Yeah, exactly. Were you gonna ask a question?
So there's data set.
Suppose there's a data
So it's in the department, so there are 2 collaborators who are working on the data set. One will be the business department, and the other will be it. So how do you approach that?
So it's an individual work.
It's an individual atomic work, but then it belongs to the department.
Okay, so for individual atomic works, we didn't talk about this, but works have the same way to add editors that collections and access to. So if you just had a use case where you had 2 professors in separate departments, one creates the work, they just add the other one to be an editor on that work, and they never have to worry about the admin set at all.
All right. So our next use case builds a little bit more. You wouldn't think so because I'm going to do the exhibit use case, but I thrown in a little twist because we wanted to make it more complex so we could build on these ideas. And basically, so in this case, I have a repository that existed before I wanted to do an exhibit. So I've got a whole bunch of holdings of rare materials that were scanned in, so it's really a big repository of images. And so the design criteria is that that there are many of these images, because they're rare materials, they're actually, a lot of them are donated by institutions or individuals, and sometimes they come with rules around how you can view them, when you can view them, how long you can view them. And so we need some sort of policies to be in place around visibility. And we also want this ability to, whenever we want to create a new exhibit, we can put things in these exhibits, so there's going to be a whole bunch of exhibits that we're going to want to create. And so the key thing about this particular system is that it's a different set of people who are creating the content and managing the content, the raw content, than are the people who are creating the exhibits. It's a different set of permissions. So we're going to describe the users. We have our admins, because we always have our admins who control the system and maintain it. But then we have our content creators. And these are the people who are going to create the works, and they're the people who are going to control the visibility of those works. And we have our exhibit creators. They're the ones who are going to create the exhibit collection. And they'll control the basic visibility of the collection itself. So they can keep it private while they're working on it, and when they get it all done, they'll switch it over to public. This particular set is very team-oriented. So you have a team of library staff who are creating these exhibits. And by nature, the only thing they can add to it are public works, because they don't control any of the visibility of the works themselves. They're just assembling these exhibits. And the whole point is that the general public can view them. So our last set of users are the general public. They don't log in. And we want them to be able to find and view individual works. We want them to be able to find and view exhibits. But I already said, they don't log in. That's the general public. So to continue on talking about users, the next thing we talk about is how the users are grouped together. the admin group always exists, the registered user group always exists. We're not giving the registered user group any special permissions in this particular system because that's all the users. That's the content creators and the people who create the exhibits. So it's not really a distinguishing group for us. So we're going to have a content creators group that allows a particular set of people to create the content and control the visibility of the works. And then for each exhibit, we have different exhibits, and for each one, we're going to set up some groups that set up who our managers are, who our depositors are, who our viewers are. So that X there will get replaced with the name of the exhibit or some identifier of the exhibit. And so we'll have those 3 groups multiple times. So the kinds of content we're putting in here, that part I kept simple. They're just all images, scanned images of rare materials. So nothing complex. And so our workflow needs for our content creators, they want to go through a mediated deposit approval process. So they have a whole bunch of users who can create content, but it can't be finalized until someone does a review of it and says, yeah, this piece is ready to go. So we're going to select the one-step mediated deposit for that. Our exhibit users, we're not actually going to let them deposit works. They can only select existing works. So I did put this under workflow, but as I kind of point out in the very bottom here, there are no workflows of this type formally supported in Hyrax. So this is more of an informal, this is how our institution does its workflow. So the exhibit is private, we add a whole bunch of content to the collection, and the team sort of informally looks at it and says, yeah, we're ready for this to go live, and then they change it to public. But again, there's nothing in Hyrax to enforce that workflow. That's our institution's personal choice. And then the visibility needs are, as I described earlier, there's a whole bunch of policies, and there are different policies controlling different works. So we need to be able to set something up that allows that to be done, to be set up, and those different dates for different things to be put in place. So I hope that by now that you immediately think of admin sets and immediately think of setting visibility policies and embargo information to set up those policies. And so what we're basically going to do is end up with rare materials. The ones that are controlled by this policy are going to go in this admin set. Ones that are controlled by another policy are going to go in another admin set. And you just do that for each policy. In some cases, there might be a legal document, and you might want to make some note of that legal document in the description of the admin set so you know how to find that document and make sure that you're following the policy correctly. Now, this is very much a use case where I want admin sets to really control the visibility of works, but unfortunately, this still is going to be copied down. So if I enter that time period incorrectly and I create a whole bunch of objects and then I realize I did it incorrectly, I'm going to have to go in and edit that manually in each of the works.
You actually can't change. This is a gotcha for visibility. If you have a visibility policy on your admin set, you cannot select anything else.
You can't select anything more broad, but you can
Yeah.
more restrictive, right?
No, it depends on the setting. So if you have, that's why the user question is important here, because if you have trusted staff users, you don't really have to enforce, if they're like never choose public, but if you have, let's say you have a policy where everything is public and you wanted to just make one exception, you can't even do that.
All right. So it's more complex than even I realized.
So you're saying you can't override it at the work level?
That's right. What it does is controls what a person can click on the work. And we have a bug in right now, or a feature request, to make sure that admins are not restricted by policies on the admin set, but users are. Does that make sense? Because you would have to move it out of your admin set.
Yeah.
You could just. But who would want to do that?
Oh, we have a use case for moving things around from
Okay, then you can do that. That's
We haven't done it yet, but we're thinking about it.
Although I will say that in that moving scenario, if what you've done is apply permissions down, that does not change when you move it to another admin set.
right. Sorry, go ahead.
All right, so I guess the bottom line to take away from that is if you create the policies, you want to be really careful up front to make sure they are accurate, because you won't be able to change them afterwards. All right, so basic discovery. We want all public users to be able to find public works. And we want them to be able to find the public collections, because in this case, our public collections are our exhibits. And but we don't want them to find admin sets, which that's actually a hard and fast thing. Admin sets are not discoverable, and that's not something that you can change. I mean, well, you can always change everything with customization, but it's not coming out of the box that way. You can't do discovery for admin sets. So we don't really have any special needs in ours for Google Scholars or schema.org, so I'm punting it. We're not going to deal with that question. And so our groups, how we're going to group works together, well, it's okay for users to like organize them all they want into user collections. It's their own personal organization, so they can kind of do what they want there. We talked about the fact that the visibility stuff, we are going to be careful. We're going to define our policies correctly, so we're not going to worry about the fact that it's really limited in what you can do if you change your mind. So we're going to create, and this is a case, there was the question about when would you want to have multiple admin sets. So this is another example of having multiple admin sets, because you're going to have an admin set per policy, per visibility policy. This is also an example of using collections and admin sets together. So we're using both in our system. So the admin sets are being used for that visibility policy. Collections are being used to create our exhibits. So the outside visible thing that we're going to let the public see is going to be our exhibit. And so in this case, we're using those two things to leverage their particular strengths. And let's see, do we need to allow works to be grouped into works? We may want to, because some of our digitized rare materials may be multi-part things. And so we might want to have the ability to have multi-part digitized images there. And otherwise, well, you know, so the default would be one per work. And our last screen, again, you know, we probably have a really good idea already what these are going to be, because we've already talked through most of the issues that drive these relationships. So for exhibits, we're not going to have collections and collections. Now, I suppose some people could decide that collections can be nested, that you might want to be able to drill down to more and more complex stuff. That's really a individual site's decision, but in ours, we're saying no nesting. And there's already no nesting for admin sets, so our visibility policies aren't nested. And I don't think you would want to do that anyway. That would really make your policies very complex. Collections to work, so yeah, we gotta have that, because that's the exhibits going, the exhibits that are holding the works we're gonna see. Admin sets for visibility policies, so we're gonna have multiples of those. We can have multiple works to works in the multi-part digital stuff, digitized stuff, and definitely files are being uploaded here. So, summarizing this one, we've got collection type strategy is user collections and exhibits. We've got admin set strategy where there's one per visibility policy, and content creators select the admin set, not the exhibit curators. And you can move to a different admin set later, but that visibility policy is not, it's not gonna change anything. So anytime you move a work to another admin set, you're not, it's not going to do what you might intuitively think it's going to do. It's not going to really do anything. And the workflow strategy, we said it's mediated deposit for the creation. That's only happening by the creators, not the exhibit curators. And visibility strategy is the visibility policy. Content creators can set that. And exhibit collections are private until the team just decides to make it public. So they can choose either one of those. There's no limits on that. That's their choice. And so our work type strategy, we're just doing a single type because I said it's all going to be images, make it easy. and works may be nested for that multi-content, digitized content. And so where only users that are the content creators can actually do the creating. So that's the work strategy. And works can hold file sets of the digitized content. And then we have the whole big thing all there. So any questions about exhibits and how you can kind of use collections and admin sets to create a more complex repository system?
Is there anything that I could do with the catalog controller to, like, go back to the second example, where I give the user the entire catalog experience for only the items in Department A versus not just using the facet, because they don't know the admin set name or anything like that. Is there a relationship between the catalog controller and these admin sets so that I can create different catalog experiences for the admin set?
So the question was, is there something about the catalog controller that would allow me to get different experiences for these different admin sets?
That's correct.
Discoverability for admin sets is what you're looking for.
Yeah, but it baked into the catalog controller, not just faceting by admin set.
Yeah, so that would, well, of course, admin sets are only going to be visible when a user's logged in because there's no public discovery for admin sets.
Okay.
I would have to think about that problem. I don't just have a ready answer to that one.
Our quick use cases, we're trying to take the idea of Samvera. One trunk, many branches. We've got an IR experience that we already offer, and we're going to bring in 600,000 cultural heritage objects.
That is our next use case.
But, okay, fantastic, great segue. But I don't want, you know, the users to get lost in those, the IR users to get lost in those 600,000 items.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we're not really gonna address your problem about the discovery of those things, but it's more like just asking this question. So we are basically saying now let's pretend that all three of those use cases we just talked about has to be supported in one system. And basically we want you to tell us what you would be concerned about. So we heard one thing already, that there would be a different sort of browsing and discovery use between library curated collections and traditional IR mediated deposit materials. So, what collection types would you use if you had to support all three of those use cases in one system? Anyone want to throw something out there? Anybody? Exhibits. You'd have to use exhibits.
User created.
Yep, user created. You'd have to use admin sets. What else did we say? Yep, that was the answer. No. There's probably more than one thing to do. But if you think about the discoverability as the problem, you know, here's one way you can think about it. Like, you could ask the question, do IR users browse, or do they come from Google, and therefore I don't care about IR users? If they come from Google and I don't care about the browsing of IR users, then I'm just gonna kind of do the best I can, but whatever. If you did think that IR users browse, you wanted them to come see the self-deposit options, really, right? How would you approach that?
You could create a collection for them.
You could create a
That's
collection.
something that we're thinking about is like bringing our IR content as a collection structure.
Yep.
That's in with all the other archival and cultural heritage.
So you would have.
And that's an interesting approach because you can organize them with the nested collections.
Right.
So you can sort of subset out these different aspects of this repository by having a high level nesting and then with the components of each individual one nested underneath, which you cannot do with admin sets because admin sets do not support nesting.
So how many admin sets would you have at the minimum with all three?
I mean, only one for policy, right?
Yeah, so we had 2 policies for use case 2 and 2 policies for use case 3. And then we had a default admin set for use case. So now we're at 5 admin sets, just for the 3 use cases. Make sense? Okay, how many work types would you use? This is not a test. I'm setting it up to feel like one, but I don't mean to.
Now, see, I kept mine easy. I said 1 work type for everything.
You need the images one, you need the 2 different ones for each master's thesis, and you need a default one for everything else.
Did everyone hear that?
Institutional repository.
Should I repeat that?
Yeah.
Okay, so there was the imagey one, there were the 2 for the departments, and then there were, there
The
was
default one for
the default one for
institutional
institutional repository. generic.
And is that called generic work or just work? Or?
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, is like, think about your user. And you want your IR user mixed with all these other work types to choose the right work type. And it's called generic work type.
And see, I was thinking the other way. I would have 1 work type called cultural heritage that would only be viewable by certain users,
You
my
could do that
library
with
staff.
custom code.
And then I could keep my same 8
Right.
work types on my IR
Yep.
the way they are.
Yep,
And then work off.
For
of
sure.
that.
for sure. That would take custom code, because you would have to be basing the availability of a work type submission to a specific user.
On the controller or on the
I don't know
module?
how he's
model?
doing that.
We do I feel like, yeah, the ETD controller, and we assign a role called ETD manager with the YAML, and certain email addresses have it does a check, does a ability to check, does this user have access to it?
So the question was, where does that customization go? It was on the controller.
The ETD controller.
Yeah.
Okay, what other pitfalls would you look out for if you combine all 3? Any ideas?
Groups.
Groups? You would have to set up groups instead of individual users. I didn't answer this one, so I just thought there might be some other ideas.
I have to say, the thing for me, when I start looking at a system where you're trying to do a whole bunch of stuff in one, is like, how, I'm gonna try and do it with customization. It would be really hard to do straight out of the box. And I'm gonna think about, how can I present the user with the thing that makes sense to that user? How can I decide this user's doing institutional repository? Or how can I decide this user's doing a DTD with a mediated deposit? Because I want to create that point early in the process of them trying to create something, so then I can limit their choices. So if they're doing institutional repository, I don't have to show them an admin set. But if they're trying to do the ETDs, then I have to let them choose between those 2 departments so that they can so they can get the right one. So I'm going to be looking for customizations that allow me to limit what the user is exposed to
Right.
in that system.
Because now we've got 4 admin sets, and the user has to choose the right one to get the right policies and the right workflows and the right reviewers on for the work that they deposit.
And I would say, in this particular combined system, only that 3rd use case was the one that had power users. That was the only one that had library staff.
Yeah.
The others are, professors across the whole university, and, graduate students who are trying to submit their dissertation. They're going to do that once. They're not going to do that many times. So they're, by definition, going to be a one-time user of this system. And so those institutional repository users and the ETD repository, they're going to be naive. We need to hold their hand a little bit. But the, librarian staff, we're going to make them work a little. They're power users. They should be able to handle a little ambiguity. So
Training. You can train them.
you can train.
Anything else? That's all.
I think that's good. This is actually good timing too. This is perfect. We're not doing the break because we already did that. Unless, do people need like a quick bio break? We can take like a 5-minute bio break if folks want to do that.
Well, we also need to do that before.
So I'm going to go ahead and start introducing the various options that we pre-created for you guys. But if you have your own, so we went ahead and created 4 use cases because you never know when you do a workshop if anybody's going to actually bring something to the workshop. So we put them up on the 4 sideboards. And so over here is multi-tier organizational structure. So that is like, I want to organize around my university as a whole, and then departments in the university, or schools in the university, and then departments. Another example of that would be, we have an app that has agencies and divisions. So the agencies are the high-level thing, and the divisions are under them. So anything that's that sort of organizational approach to organizing things. In the back corner over there, a really common topic that comes up is migration from DSpace to Hyrax. So if you're interested in talking about that in this context of doing design, that would be the place to go. In the back corner over here, we have images, video, and audio. So if you've got media concerns, you can do that. And the one up here is journals, issues, and articles. So when you go to the syllabus, it's down towards the bottom. It talks about our hands-on activity. There's a link to this particular directory. And so you can get to all these worksheets there. More than one group could do the same topic. Somebody could do their own topic. Anyone have a topic they want to pitch to see if people are interested in it?
Migrate from content DM might be another one.
Mine is kind of similar to this one, except it's taking multiple libraries and their various collection structures. So campus libraries, and then mixing university archives and IR material in there also.
Anyone else have a use case that they want to pitch that people might also be interested in talking about? I saw more hands in this go up when I asked if you guys brought use cases. There's at least 3. You got one?
Well, no, we talked about it all already.
We talked about it all already. Okay.
He's done.
Yes, so each of those worksheets has the questions that we did before, where there's the high level, these, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down through 8. So those are the same ones that we used when we talked about the use cases. So just a second ago, there's some follow-on stuff that you can do as well to sort of help you guide around your repository design process. You want to go back to the extended? So these questions may not be enough to get your thoughts flowing. So we went through and added like more detailed questions. So there's a link to that right at the top of each one of the worksheet pages. So I guess the next step is who wants to be in which group. So we could start off, we could just have people go to different sections, see where you end up. And if that doesn't work, we can try something different.
We also have some paper, if you would rather work on paper.
Yes, so you can, if you want to use one of the ones in here, you can copy the worksheet and just edit it directly in Google Docs. If you can't do that, let me know and we'll adjust the permissions. I think it should be set so that everybody can edit. So I know you guys are still talking, but we are like almost out of time completely. So I do want to have at least 5 minutes for questions and talking about the process itself and how that worked. Did it help you to organize your thoughts on how to approach repository design? I don't think we have time to talk about your solutions because we just kept going, which is good. That means you guys are really into it. So, any comments, questions?
It was nice to have someone who knew what they were talking about. That's all we had.
Yeah, so Julie participated in the group at the back, so they're happy to have had her be part of that group. Any other comments or questions? Anything about the process itself? Did Did the worksheet work for people? Did you like having these questions to like help organize your thoughts?
It was really good to know what questions to ask. Like very helpful. I wouldn't have asked all of them.
So excellent. Any particular place that you found you were getting stuck on the worksheet questions?
Well, I think one thing about the worksheet question that we would change maybe is we were kind of eliminating admin sets because we didn't have policies or workflows. But we still wanted, I think, oh gosh, how's that? We were kind of, you know, that question between a collection type for permissions or an admin set for permissions. I think we'd still struggle with that. The other thing we've been trying to figure out is they really want a publishing workflow for a collection. And there's really not a way to do that. We're doing migrating from Contentdm.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. There was at least one other group that was trying to do a publishing mechanism, the one that was doing journals, issues, and articles. They were talking about how to do publishing from Hyrax too. And I mean, that just doesn't exist right now, but you can customize it, make it a plugin so that other people can use it.
We got to a point also where we were curious about how solar cores could, sorry. We got to a point where we were looking at our DSpace migration where we got to the point with discovery again, and we asked ourselves, is there something that solar cores could offer us to help with discovery versus just the visibility in the admin sense? And so just kind of curious as an after conversation, how can solar help? Again, like the catalog controller question, is there ways we can use admin sets to help configure solar or help configure the catalog? Don't know.
Yeah, that's definitely in the customization realm, but I think that's an excellent question. We have like 5 minutes left. Anyone want to talk about their particular part and how it was looking for you? I know this particular group was looking at a custom workflow situation where they had a reviewer who sort of decided who the reviewers would be. And so no way to easily do that in Hyrax out of the box, but you could create a custom workflow that said the first step is for someone to decide who the group of reviewers are going to be, and the second step is more like the mediated deposit type workflow on the second level. Any other like interesting customizations folks wanted to do? I shouldn't have taken your last 5 minutes. You don't have any questions. You could spend 5 more minutes on your workflows, your works, your repo design. I'm getting tired. All right. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.